Tomorrow, in an action-packed week of lunches, we have FCC correspondent and author David Pilling talking about the growth delusion, how the world is wrongly obsessed by GDP. That's tomorrow's lunch. And then Thursday, I tell you, we're packing them all in this week, we have CEO of the Mekong Club, Matt Friedman, talking about how can we win the fight against modern slavery. So that brings me neatly to Markus, who needs no introduction, passionate environmentalist, formerly an official greenie, I would say, but now switched his focus to our urban environment, and he's going to tell us why feet are better than wheels. Could I just ask you, as a matter of housekeeping, to remember to switch your phones back on afterwards? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anna, for that introduction. It's first of all, it's a great privilege for me to speak at this club. As I was reminded by Florence just now, you go to the Hong Kong Club for gastronomy, to the Country Club for sporting facilities, and to the FCC for intellectual stimulation. The original title to this talk was going to be Build Bridges to People's Aspirations, Not Zoo High. But Victor Mallet, a member of the board here, a very distinguished member, thought it wasn't punchy enough, so he changed it. Personally, I think my original one was punchier, but no matter. This talk is about putting people before cars, but as part of the wider discussion about how Hong Kong people, in particular young people, want their cities to look like, how they want it to be planned. In December '06, at the height of the controversy over the demolition of the old Star Ferry Pier, I wrote an opinion piece for the SCMP. It was the first thing I'd ever written for the SCMP, in which I stated that the process by which, following the handover, Hong Kong people felt a different sense of belonging, of being citizens instead of colonial subjects, had led to a disconnect, and I quote, between the aspirations of the new and growing body of citizens on the one hand, and the outlook and mentality of our present administrators on the other. Strangely enough, I wrote, that mentality is colonial. It is the mentality of the administrative officer, upright, all-knowing, and paternalistic. We will take the views of the community into account, but we know what's best for the community. Why shouldn't we continue to fill in the harbour? Why shouldn't we continue to tear down old buildings? Why shouldn't we continue to build roads wherever we want? Haven't these things always worked in the past? Are they not the key to Hong Kong's success? The demolition of the old Star Ferry Pier was a watershed in Hong Kong's history, and there's no way I can underemphasize that. It was a watershed moment. At that time, Christine Low, Peter Wong, Paul Zimmerman, and myself, we refer to ourselves as the Gang of Four, we just founded an NGO called Designing Hong Kong, and we were campaigning to create a better harbourfront on the new Central Reclamation. And I remember at one point, Paul Zimmerman and I were having a coffee and complaining to each other, this is hard work. Nobody seems terribly interested in what we are saying. This is going to take another generation or two. Then the protests over the demolition of the old Star Ferry happened, and overnight the debate changed. On the evening of the last crossings by the Star Ferry from the old pier, thousands of Hong Kong people turned up in an outpouring of nostalgia and peaceful protest, seemingly out of nowhere. Activists staged sit-ins and chained themselves to the railings, and notably, almost all of those were young people. The response of the government was incomprehension. Donald Tsang said, the correct process of consultation has been followed. Michael soon urged the whole community to consider this matter in a rational manner and to remember the practical needs of society, the practical needs of society. So here we had senior public servants brought up under a development model, rational, practical, unsentimental, which no longer resonated with a growing body of citizens. These citizens were saying, and now continue to say, the practical needs of society have, in some cases, to give way to the needs of sentiment, to the preservation of history, heritage, and the environment, and to a better quality of life. I'm happy to say that 11 years after I wrote that piece, some things have changed. For example, our immediate past and present directors of planning are very supportive of planning principles that stress placemaking, human-scale neighborhoods, and pedestrian-friendly environments. Our current chief executive, Carrie Lam, has been very supportive of heritage preservation, has mentioned pedestrianization and quality of life issues in her first policy address and on many other occasions. Now, I start with the assumption, which I think is a perfectly reasonable one, that city planners should reflect the aspirations of the community. So what do people want? Specifically, what do young people want? Do people want a more crowded city? Our population today is just under 8 million, and government sees us peaking at about 8.2 million in 2043. I don't think there's anyone in Hong Kong who doesn't think this is enough. We are a crowded city as it is. 40% of our population lives above the 16th floor. The average size of our dwellings is very small. If we want to keep our country parks, control reclamation, create more urban parks and public spaces, increase the average size of dwellings, then there's no reason to bemoan our stable population. Do we want a city planned for tourists? Well, here I think this still enters too much into the thinking of our civil servants. Planning a city for tourists is putting the cart before the horse. Was Venice planned for tourists? Florence, Athens, Sydney. A city should be planned for citizens. Create an attractive city for citizens and tourists will come. Do we want to preserve our country parks, which have made Hong Kong, if one looks at a satellite photo of the region, and this is very easy to do on Google Maps, you will see that Hong Kong is the green lung of the Pearl River Delta. As we all know, our country parks are unique in the world and the envy of many cities. Do we want more urban parks like the one in my neighborhood, Cyberport, where people can walk their dogs, relax after work, interact with neighbors? Extremely popular, I can tell you, Cyberport. Do we want an ever-increasing number of vehicles on our roads? Our vehicles fleet is growing by 4% per annum. Are we going to allow this to grow unchecked until our entire city is covered in roads? Young people's aspirations for the city are very different from those of their parents and grandparents. They lived at a time in the 50s and 80s, up to the 80s, when our population was growing by roughly 1 million every decade. So we needed rapid infrastructure development, roads, hospitals, schools, public housing. Not so today. Millennials would rather give up their car than their smartphone. This is a fact. Unlike previous generations, no car manufacturer shows up in their lists of cool brands, and this is also a first. Youth want cities to focus more on investing in new transportation options and walkable communities. They value life experiences, convenience, and healthier lifestyles, much more than their forebears. Government has to recognize these aspirations and build bridges to those who hold them. It seems to me there are three fundamental impediments to better urban planning in Hong Kong. Firstly, we have a policy of deriving maximum revenue from land sales. Yeah, this is a very big topic, and I don't want to go into it in detail here. I can come back and speak about that if you want. An example of how this can lead to less than optimal planning is the government's plans for the tendering of Site 3 down by the harbourfront. Secondly, we have a transport department which is still too much focused on cars and not subject to planning control. I don't think many of you here know that when you have a greenfield site, say, the transport department can come and say, I need such and such for roads. And they're perfectly entitled to do that without town planning board oversight. Thirdly, transport department has access to Hong Kong's biggest honeypot. All government revenue from land sales goes exclusively, or what we call hypothecated, to the Capital Works Reserve Fund, which can be used only for infrastructure development, not for healthcare, nor education, nor provision for the elderly, nor solving our air pollution. This treasure chest is reserved for the one interest group that matters in Hong Kong, the Concrete Coalition. And a word of warning, record prices are being paid at land auctions, so more concrete is coming our way. Recently, I've become involved in the issues of pedestrianization and walkability. Specifically, I'm the chair of an organization called Walk DVRC, which I'll come to later. Why are these issues so important to me? I believe that car-focused transport policy leads to bad planning, uglier cities, higher pollution. Putting pedestrians first encourages human-scale planning, the creation of neighborhoods, and the promotion of neighborliness. It encourages human interaction, which is the foundation of civilization. Even today, we tend to visit cities where there's a pleasant walking experience rather than cities where the car reigns supreme. And let me state here, this is not purely about connectivity, okay? Because of our compactness, it's very easy to walk to your destination in Hong Kong. But by and large, it is not a pleasant experience. At her opening address at the Walk 21 conference in October 2016, this was a conference, an international conference that was held in Hong Kong to promote walkability and discuss walkability issues. Carrie Lam said this: "We are a strong supporter of its mission in promoting walkability in Hong Kong. We seek to make walking not only more convenient, but also more enjoyable. In the past, we tended to rely on a vehicular transport approach, and our community cared more about the interests of passengers and car drivers. Now we are opening up new planning horizons, forging a new community awareness and consensus to strike a better balance between pedestrian and vehicular mobility needs." Well, I'm pleased to tell Carrie that there is a project in Hong Kong that can put those new planning horizons into practice, and that is Walk DVRC. Walk DVRC is a campaign for the pedestrianization for Devoe Road Central between Pedder Street and Western Market. That's a 1.4 kilometer stretch. So if you now turn to the screens, let me just say a few things about DVRC. What is it? It's the heart of our historic CBD. It's a critical business and transportation artery. It's the most polluted stretch of road on the north shore of Hong Kong Island. And it's a terrible experience for pedestrians. And finally, it has appalling traffic congestion that benefits no one, not the bus companies nor the tram companies. This is a photograph of Devoe Road Central as it used to be. It's a very historical street. The trams have been there forever. Devoe Road Central did actually, at one time, was actually the shoreline of Hong Kong. But what I want to show here is, it's almost an example, isn't it, of a carless DVRC. What's notable is that the people are interacting with the trams completely comfortably. Completely comfortably. We don't need barriers. This is DVRC today. 4 lanes of traffic, 77 bus routes, high buildings and canyon effect, and very narrow spaces for all the pedestrians. The result of the buses, the traffic, and the canyon effect is that, as I said earlier, this is the most polluted stretch of road along the north shore of Hong Kong Island. That 1.4 kilometer stretch is the only red section which denotes the highest level of pollution. Now, what I want to say here is that this is not only about DVRC. Okay, this campaign is about the pedestrianization of DVRC to revive a decaying historic CBD. It's about neighborhood revival as much as it is about improving walkability along DVRC. Fixed DVRC and our CBD is revived. Fixed DVRC and our central core has a heart. Fixed DVRC and the cultural and heritage sites around it are connected. And what do I mean by connected? Well, we have a lot of iconic sites in our historic CBD. We have the Daigon, which is the Central Police Station, coming on stream, a hugely impressive facility. We have PMQ, which is a great place to visit. I love going there, but it's a hell of a plane to get to. We have Central Market, which is now being taken up by the URA for improvement. We have the Grand Millennium Plaza, which is a very nice open space along the Devoe Road Central. We have the Manmo Temple, a historic location. Western Market, another historic location, a lovely building which is underutilized at the moment. And all that part around the western end of Devoe Road Central, which is very historic, with lots of traders, seafood traders, and other shops that have been in the same family for generations. And then on the other side of Devoe Road Central, we've got that whole Site 3 coming on stream. So we've got all these heritage sites, but they are very poorly connected. They're difficult to get to, and for pedestrians, it's a nightmare to get to them. So our view is that pedestrianization of Devoe Road Central will draw all those sites together with better connectivity. So I'm just going to quickly show some photos here that were taken by some of our interns on one afternoon at DVRC, chosen at random, okay, and without much comment. Not one smiling face. It is actually one of the most dangerous stretches of the road for jaywalking and accidents, according to a pedestrian safety consultant that we've spoken to. So as you can see, we have a problem there. And these last two photographs I'd like you to particularly pay attention to, because you could consider DVRC to be our Oxford Street or our Broadway. It is the central artery of our central business district. What other road like this anywhere else in the world would tolerate this kind of treatment? You'd never see this anywhere on Broadway in New York. You'd never see this anywhere on Oxford Street in London or on any other major street, downtown street in the world. So we can do better than that. Now, I've often said that this is the first campaign I've been involved with where no one I've spoken to about it thinks it's a bad idea. You may disagree. But most people retort, how is it possible to do it? Is it too difficult? Well, here I want to give you some examples from around the world. This is in Seoul, where they had a raised expressway right through the middle of town that was built on top of the historic river. Well, the mayor of Seoul decided to get rid of that expressway. Can you imagine the difficulties of doing that? And he restored the river, which is now a great attraction, not only for citizens of Seoul, but for tourists as well. New York City, right? The Broadway, as people who've been to New York will know, is a very busy road. And Mayor Bloomberg decided to do a 3-year trial scheme to pedestrianize a section of it, which became extremely popular. Okay. Last year, the 3 years came to an end, and the city council voted to make this permanent. And 60,000 retailers supported it. London. The Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has initiated a project to pedestrianize Oxford Street. Okay, is that easy? I can tell you it isn't. They've got exactly the same problem with rerouting of bus routes, with rerouting of taxis, and it's very similar to Devoro Central because there are no residents along that street, which is a great help. Vienna, this is something I know well because my wife is Viennese. Maria-Hilfer-Straße, okay, the Oxford Street of Vienna. And as you can see on the left, there were 4 lanes of traffic. And after pedestrianization on the right, they converted 2 lanes fully to pedestrianization. And 2 lanes in the middle, they allowed some traffic. So deliveries, hybrid buses, taxis, etc. can go through. But rather cleverly, they have, there's no gap between the pavement and the road. Okay, it's just one design. So the pedestrians feel that they have the right to share that space with traffic. And as you can see, they're quite comfortably interacting with the cars in that photo. And incidentally, Maria Vasilaku, the deputy mayor of Vienna, came here in 2016 and put on an exhibition at the City Hall on this project. And Carrie Lam was there, made the opening address, said all the right things, and afterwards I said to Carrie, well, actually, do you know that we have a project in Hong Kong where we can deliver something like this? And her response was, too difficult. Okay, too difficult. So this is why I have too difficult in quotes here. And this is why I want to say to her that maybe not. This is Shanghai, Nanjing Lu, and this is our vision for Devore Road Central in Hong Kong. Okay, so the trams stay, 1 lane remains open to traffic, and the other lanes are closed. The 1 lane has to remain open to traffic for circulation, for example, to the wing-on parking lot, for deliveries, for emergency vehicle access, etc. Okay, when this campaign started in the year 2000, we were still talking about full pedestrianization, but we commissioned a traffic consultancy study, and they said, no, you can't do that. 1 lane has to remain open. So that's fine. This is a quote from K.K. Ling, the former director of planning, who's an advisor to our campaign now. And he said this to us over one lunch. He said, all global historic central business district regeneration projects have begun with pedestrianization schemes. And he's right. And what I want to say to all the politicians when I meet them, and I've met several, I've done this presentation now on DVRC and all the other stuff, to about 50 different people, politicians and civil servants and so on. And I stress that this is a project that has immense political capital. Especially with the youth of today, whose aspirations for urban planning are very different from previous generations. And we need those bridges to the youth, and we need that political capital. So these are all the benefits that pedestrianizing Devoe Roads Central can bring. And interestingly enough, all those benefits have been mentioned in Carrie Lam's first policy address. Right? So we're not proposing anything revolutionary here. Carrie Lam wants this to happen. This is our steering committee, and some of you may recognize some of the names here. I want to pick out particularly Ivan Ko, who's the chair of the China Real Estate Chamber of Commerce, representing most of the real estate owners in Hong Kong. And I have to say that the real estate owners generally are very supportive of this scheme for obvious reasons. Is it feasible? Is it possible? And the answer to that, to anticipate maybe some of your questions later, is that it is feasible and ready to go. Okay, this campaign has been going on for 17 years. I only joined it about 3 years ago. It was started by planners and professional people, architects, Hong Kong Institute of Planners and so on. And since we founded DVRC, it's been expanded to the wider public. $7 million has already been invested in this project, and it's backed by powerful, influential, diverse organizations. But the main reason why it is going to become possible is because the central Wan Chai bypass is coming on stream. That will give us the possibility to divert traffic from Devoe Road Central onto Connaught Road. Oops. Anyway. Okay, so is this vision, which stresses environmental quality and more sympathetic urban planning, is it incompatible with Hong Kong's continued development? Is it anti-development? So you won't be surprised to hear that I don't think it is anti-development nor incompatible with Hong Kong's economic development. On the contrary, it's a necessary reinvention of Hong Kong that plays to our strengths, because we are a knowledge-based economy and we have to generate and attract the best talents in the world. A developed country is not a place where the poor have cars. It's where the rich use public transport. If a space is designed for people, they will walk. If it's designed for cars, they will drive. Now, Carrie Lam has said government will be a promoter and innovator rather than a regulator. So we should hold her to these words. Our self-confidence in Hong Kong is at a very low ebb right now. So for the government and for the people of Hong Kong, I have one slogan: mission possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Markus. Now we will take some questions. Please bear in mind that we will definitely be done by 2 p.m. So please, if you could raise your hand and say, introduce yourself, say who you are, please.
Gentleman at the end, yeah.
Hello, Richard Ward. Thanks very much for the excellent presentation, very interesting. You focused several times on the importance of this sort of design to young people. But what we also hear is that population centers around the world, cities are, the populations are aging and becoming more metropolitan oriented. So generalizing from what you've said about this particular part of Hong Kong, what's the message for the planning for an aging population and planning for public health?
Thanks for that question. I actually think that planning for the urban planning aspirations of youth actually coincide very strongly with a city which is more friendly for the aged. when I spoke about pedestrian access, more human scale neighborhoods, an encouragement of neighborliness, etc. Those are things that benefit the aged. Lady there.
Genevieve Hilton from BASF. So you've convinced me. I'm all for it. What are the actual, then now putting on a Hong Kong hat of being practical, what are the next steps? Like what needs to actually happen for the scheme to be implemented?
Yeah.
Like who needs to say yes?
Right. Well, we are a pressure group, so we do a lot of bottom-up and top-down engagement. The bottom-up engagement is through doing surveys from the shopkeepers along the street and the users of the street. We have charrettes and seminars to encourage the message to go out to the general public. From the top down, as I say, I've made this presentation now to many, many people, the Director of Planning, the Director of Heritage, Bernard Chan, Changyok Singh, a lot of politicians and civil servants. So we're getting the message through there as well. And interestingly enough, the response from government is very positive. Everybody thinks this is a great idea. But as I say to my team, ultimately we have only one objective, and that is to get Carrie Lam to do it. Because without the authority of the mayor, something like this will never get done. There are too many departments involved in the issues, each with their particular concerns, and each of which can put a spanner in the works. And only someone like Carrie, and if you look at the examples from around the world, the Mayor of Seoul, Mayor Bloomberg in London, Mayor Sadiq Khan in London, Bloomberg in New York, Sadiq Khan in London, Ana Hidalgo in Paris. Without the mayor, these things don't get done. There was another aspect of your story. Oh, practicalities. Yeah. Well, I mean, we can't spend the money because we don't have that much money to do all the consultancy studies that are necessary. The government has the resources. Now, interestingly, in Carrie Lam's last policy address, as part of her policy to encourage walkability, she said that Transport Department would choose 2 projects to investigate for walkability. And I like to think that this is one of those 2 projects. I hope they don't choose something that's easy to do. Why bother, right? It should be something that has the capacity to change policy in Hong Kong.
Anybody else?
If there's no one else, I'll tell you a little story just to close. Oh, okay, sorry.
Down there.
Is there anything that any of us can do on an individual level to help?
Spread the message, and if you happen to have the opportunity to speak to any senior civil servants, or even to sit next to Carrie Lam at a ball or a dinner or something, mention this to her. Because the more these things are mentioned to the bureaucrats, and particularly to our leadership, the more their ears prick up and they start to think, oh, maybe this is an idea whose time has come. Yep.
Hi. What kind of resistance have you come across in your presentations or conversations with people, and from which quarters?
Yeah.
Sorry, could you just introduce yourself, please?
It's David Kwan, member of the club.
Thank you. Interestingly enough, the area of most difficulty that we're facing these days is from the district councillors. There's a lot of local politics going on there between the Democrats and the establishment parties, each of which wants to gain an advantage. They seem to cotton on to every aspect of possible public objections to the scheme. We've had some objections from shopkeepers who are a bit worried about rising rents and gentrification. And what we say to them is, this is not what we're after. If you look at the western side of Devereux Central in particular, that's extremely historical. We want to preserve all that. But it reminds me also of when we've had two really excellent meetings with the tram companies, and the GM of the tram company, who's a Frenchman, because it's French-owned, Hong Kong Tramways. He said to me, we've done this scheme so many times in France. There's no magic behind it. I've got personal experience in all this. And in every case, the main objectors are the shopkeepers. And in every case, they're the ones who have benefited, who eventually benefit. But being French, they'll never admit it. Any other questions? I think there was one here. Any questions from the floor?
Down the line.
Yeah, Simon?
Simon Riquet, member of the club. Markus, you probably answered this already, but on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you in terms of progress, do you think, in getting this done?
That's a difficult question to answer. In some areas, we're at, say, 2 with the district councillors. In other areas, we're at 8 in terms of support from the real estate owners and some aspects, some parts of the bureaucracy from very senior members. So it's a work in progress, but we're definitely on the map. I know that we are being considered as one of the 2 sites for investigation by the Transport Department, and we're lobbying hard to become one of those 2 sites. And if we do become one of those 2 sites, more than half of my job is already done.
Yeah, thank you, Florence de Changy. I have 2 questions. I have more, actually, but I'll stop at 2. Number 1, did you consider Queen's Road? Because to me, it would have been even more obvious and more central to try and make the most of Queen's Road as opposed to Dever Road. I'm sure you have, but I'd be interested to hear why you picked Dever Road. And the other thing is if you could comment on Carrie Lam, because we understand she's instrumental, she's the one who will make it happen or not happen, yet she was equally important in the 2006 events around the Star Ferry. So how have you seen her evolve, and what do you think has she learned from this in these basically 12 years?
Right. So Queen's Road, very quickly, our traffic consultants did look at that and decided that pedestrianisation of Queen's Road would actually be more disruptive to traffic than pedestrianisation of Devereux Road Central, okay, which at the present moment is used mostly by buses, which could be rerouted. Okay. The second thing against Queen's Road Central is that there are residences along there, and that's always tricky from the point of view of pedestrianisation, as the example from Mongkok has shown. Carrie Lam, she is not one who shies away from difficult decisions. So of all the chief executives that we've had, I think she's the one who I'm most hopeful will be able to make this kind of decision. The other thing about that is that she is responsible for many of these iconic buildings that I showed you earlier, PMQ, Central Police Station, etc. Why wouldn't she want to complete that legacy by looking at the regeneration of our historic CBD on a holistic basis? We've basically allowed our CBD to grow up without any holistic planning, and it's time that we looked at it from that point of view.
Thank you.
I can't deny my mother the last question.
I'm Beate Shaw, Markus's mother.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether you have made some feasibility studies, what's going to happen. I know the trams are all for it.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Feasibility studies
on buses, bus rules.
on buses. Okay. Now, when I mentioned that that congestion along Deville Road Central benefits no one, and then I mean exactly that. During rush hours, buses and trams move along Deville Road Central at little more than at about walking pace, right? How is that benefiting the public, all the bus companies, all the tram companies? So I made this presentation once to another group that I belong to, and John Chan, who's the chair of Carmel Motor Bus, happened to be there, and I said to him, you know, yours is the opinion I'm really most anxious to hear. And he said, surprisingly, he said, I'm very agnostic about this because the congestion is so bad along that stretch. It takes as long for our bus routes to get from Teensway Way to Deville Road Central as it takes from Deville Road Central to Wan Chai North, right? And the tram companies, they say also, you know, our usage is falling because it's quicker for people to walk.
So, my question.
I didn't answer the question. Have we done feasibility studies?
Yes.
We have done a preliminary transport. Preliminary transport study was done by MVA, which is Hong Kong's leading traffic consultant, at huge cost to us. And one of the results of that study was that we couldn't totally pedestrianize Deville Road Central, that we had to keep one lane open. But we do need substantial amounts of money to make that report more comprehensive. That question's coming fast and loose.
Yeah, Paul Christensen, a member of the club. My question is really about the time these take, and I guess it's not unique to this project, but everybody says Hong Kong's a fast-moving city. It's rubbish. You talked about the New York example. I mean, Bloomberg wasn't even mayor when you started this project. He's become mayor. He's done the studies. He's done a 3-year trial, and now it's gone into permanent thing. And we're still thinking about it. Why does everything take so long in Hong Kong? Where is the bottleneck?
It never ceases to frustrate me and anger me that we are always behind the curve in Hong Kong. We never establish best practice. We always follow far behind. And you know, why should this be? Right? We're a city of 8 million people. We have a population that's bigger than many European countries. Surely we have the skills as well. So why is it that we don't have the vision to do these things? And I really can't answer that question. And, you know, it's one of the reasons why I think that one of the biggest issues in Hong Kong at the moment is our loss of self-confidence. We don't seem to be able to do anything, whereas we used to be a can-do society. Yes? No?
So how come we have all those fences all over the streets? How did they spring up seemingly overnight?
Well, this is a completely different subject, but it is very amusing because we had a trial closure of 2 blocks of Deville Road Central back in September 2016. And although we had discussed this beforehand with the tram companies, and they said, don't worry about it, we know exactly what to do, our drivers will slow down, and they'll keep an eye out for pedestrians. No, that wasn't good enough. The police put up not one barrier on either side of the tram lines, but 2 barriers on either side of the tram lines. You know, we have so many barriers in Hong Kong that I do wonder whether the government thinks that we are sheep rather than people. But unfortunately, many people like to be treated as sheep, I've decided. Yeah.
One more person, I think, with a question.
How did you get involved in this? And your organization has spent 7 million, and who has funded it?
Right. We have raised funds from the public. a lot of, well, Jennifer, CEO, can you help me out on this? Because this is kind of before my time.
A number of friendly NGOs and family foundations in general have funded research efforts, and so far over $7 million has already been invested in the campaign over the last 18 years. And we continue to get interested parties such as NGOs and family foundations who think that this is a good cause to fund.
Thanks, Jennifer. I just want to come back on the question, what can you do? I'm very happy to make these presentations at whatever forum you are a member of, okay, just in order to spread the message. Okay. And I think that's the end, but I have a quick story to tell, if I may.
Go.
I was in Singapore last August for the 100th birthday of my great-aunt, and a big celebratory lunch, and I ended up next to my cousin who runs the business down there. So I said, Mark, what are you busy with these days? So he said, oh, I'm the chair of the Orchard Road Business Association. So I said, well, you know, what does the association do? And he said, well, the thing that we're very busy on right now is the pedestrianization of Orchard Road. Again, the Singaporeans have stolen a march on us.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much, Markus. I'm afraid I have to inflict the obligatory FCC gift on you, but we hope you'll come back and give us an update soon, hopefully a positive one.
Yeah, thank you.